In this discussion, we'll be focusing on effective career guidance and how it relates to the future world of work. We'll be looking at how the world of work has changed over the last decade or so, and look forwards with regards to the next sort of 5 to 10 years to consider whether we're adequately preparing students and equipping them with the skills and tools to succeed in the ever-changing world of work they find themselves in once they leave school and higher education. So yeah, great to have you all on the call. Thanks so much for joining. Let's do a quick round of introductions, shall we? I'm just going to go by the order of the tiles here. David, do you want to kick off and quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. First of all, thanks for being here. I hope this is a topic that we can all unpack and find some common threads. My name is David Turner. I'm the college and career counselor here at the Dwight School of Dubai, and it's a pleasure being here.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Izzet, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. It's very exciting to be part of this conversation today. I'm one of the high school counselors at American School of Doha in Qatar. And this is my 6th year at my current location. And I'm happy to be part of this conversation today.
Brilliant. Thanks, Izzet. Jason, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Jason Holly, currently at Hong Kong International School. I'm a high school counselor, a comprehensive counselor who does the social emotional piece as well as the college careers advising. And this is my 8th year here at this school.
Brilliant. And last but definitely not least, Andy.
Hey, I'm Andy Johnson. I'm from Immerse Education. I'm based in the UK. I'm basically responsible for running all of our online programs for 13 to 18-year-olds and also developing new programs. Really happy to be here. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Awesome. So yeah, wealth of experience from different regions as well, which will make it a really, really interesting conversation, I'm sure. So yeah, diving straight into the first question, really. Let's consider how has the world of work changed over the last maybe say 20 to 30 years? And how might we sort of anticipate the world of work changing into the future? Some sort of high level thoughts here. Who'd like to kick off that?
Well, look, I'm happy to kick off. I can speak from personal experience. There's that old expression that half of the jobs that will exist in sort of 20, 30 years don't even exist yet. And that was certainly true for me when I was at university. I did a history degree and I've worked in international education pretty much ever since graduating, and find myself running online programs that didn't even exist back then. So I think it's always difficult to predict where we're going. I think in terms of where we currently find ourselves post-COVID, I think we're going to see a real shift towards initiatives and organizations that are sustainable, that are focusing much more on the environmental concerns that we find ourselves in at the moment. But yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of crystal ball gazing when you look to the future.
Anyone else want to jump in on that? How's the world of work change? Is that what what do you think?
Did you say is that? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I actually, before this call, I just to refresh my, existing knowledge, I watched a lot of videos on YouTube and on those kind of platforms, and now I'm like full of those information. And I think the major changes of course, in the industries, in the world, also, change the future of the nature of the work, the nature of education. When I started my college in 2002, I had the desktop. Now, and it was something, it was a tool to have, but now my students have, smartphones, tablets, and, their learning tools are definitely different. So this, I think, is one of the important changes that obviously impacts everything. And obviously the work, I'm thinking of my parents, for example. They were like, from 8 to 5. It was very structured, it was very work-placed. And that work, now becomes, especially with the pandemic, people work on the beach, people work from home. So, from office or from more structured to from maybe non-structured, places. So it jumped into that kind of shift. And there weren't jobs like gig economy or those kind of part-time jobs, but they became, something available for young people or for people of certain ages. So definitely the automation increased a lot, and it replaced definitely some jobs, I think, and I think it keeps replacing it for more. But on the other side, for most positive changes, I think there is more the emphasis on diversity and inclusion, or at least there is awareness on the workplaces, which is good. I think it's a very important, and I think there is more importance to work-life balance, especially for the last few years.
Yeah, I would echo what I've heard so far. I think that, when it comes to changes, even when I talk to my students, I think that it's important to, yeah, anyone's guess, the crystal ball, but at the same time, when you're talking to young people, there needs to be some kind of first rung on the ladder discussion. I think that when it comes to the proposed changes, there are factors we can consider. I mean, one has already been mentioned, remote jobs and remote workspaces. That to me is very exciting. Even governments are leaning into specialized visas to promote that kind of nomadic e-commerce. Flexible work roles as well, I think, is important. And there's two other things for us to consider as well. I don't think any of us is surprised about the digital disruption, that's here right now with AI and ChatGPT and some of the other things that we're experiencing. And I believe that those will certainly have a huge impact on the future for jobs and workspaces. But let's also not forget that a lot of our workforce is currently aging. And so, a trip to the Bureau of Labor Statistics will show you that, we need to start thinking about, yes, digital jobs. We need to look at big data. We need to look at software and engineering structures, but we also need to look at things like healthcare and home health and personal needs. So those are all, I think, real opportunities. And again, going back to what I've already said, or what's already been said, I should say, it's anybody's guess.
Yeah, similar thoughts here. Automation, if it can be automated, it is probably going to be, just as I think we're all seeing in supermarkets that we're now checking ourselves out, and who knows how many other professions may wind up, kind of falling away because it can be done, automatically. With the remote working, I guess one piece that I'd add is something that we can, I think, try to impart in our students is that with remote working, I think comes that extra autonomy and the flexibility, but also like it's some added responsibility where you're not going to have a supervisor like swinging by your office, perhaps every day, a couple of times to check in on how something is going. And so trying to get students to realize that also with their schooling, that there isn't going to be a teacher who's constantly checking in on you and whether that project is done or paper is finished or, administering that exam or whatnot. So trying to foster more of those independent skills in the school setting. And then I think it was already mentioned about kind of like, the job changes and the jobs that don't exist currently, but also preparing our students, for that we don't, I think we need to break out of the idea that we're having them choose a career, when we're doing inventories or when we're exposing them to like different possibilities that, it's instead, I think we need to reframe things as issues they care about or problems they want to solve or kind of like different passion areas that they have rather than like, well, you should take these classes and then you'll major in this and then you'll get a job in such and such. And instead, kind of try to we need to reframe, I think, from the career advising standpoint of that dynamic model of like, yeah, every 10 years, you really might be changing. And so as long as you're in things that you care about, but you have that flexibility to pivot, then you're going to be in a better position. And I think Andy and David both brought up good points that also like whatever we talk about here over the next half hour, like, it could be, we could be completely wrong, and that we can't predict the future. And so therefore, how can we foster that flexibility in our students? Because we can't anticipate the future. So rather than preparing them for narrow pathways, how can we keep as many doors open as possible?
Yeah, I think that's just a brilliant point, Jason. I think you're absolutely right. It's about preparing them for a whole range of possible outcomes. But I think the key thing that you said there, which I fully agree with, it's about understanding passion and identifying the things that they're interested in, and then guiding them to think about how they can work within that field, within what matches their own values and what that matches their own morals, if you like.
There's one other thing I would add to that as well. It's important to remember, one of the things I tell my kids all the time, remember, when we're reaching into the future, we're not reaching to a final destination. We're simply looking for the next rung on the ladder. And so one of the things I hope to talk about later is a progression. I think we go from high school to college and career. And so if we can be flexible enough, I really appreciate that term, Jason. I think you're right. We need to be flexible enough to give kids the time to continue to develop as young academics, as well as people who are learning skills in life as well. So, yeah, I agree. I totally agree. That flexibility is quintessential.
All right, I'm gonna have to steal your catchphrase there, David. Reaching into the future, not determining the final destination. I'll try to quote you.
The great tagline.
I just want to add something, while listening to you, and while I was thinking about this question. I think in the past, the career paths were more linear. People were finishing high schools. If they have the opportunity, they were going to colleges or universities, or getting degrees and getting a job, and coming to a point that later in their career. But now, I think with the expansion of technology, which opened new, I think, opportunities for people from different parts of the world, people in their early 20s can become the co-founder of startups or certain companies, game companies or tech companies, and can suddenly become a millionaire or billionaire. And then they find themselves leading people in their early years of their life. I think this is and it, of course, with the expansion of technology or in all over the world, I think people are, especially the young people, I think, are also very tempted to jump in their careers. They are not like, I think, us or like the previous generations who are thinking very linear. I finish my college and then I go and have another degree maybe, and then so they are just jumping ahead, and I want to be the CEO. I want to be the co-founder. So I think this is also a big change, in the mindset, towards work.
Yeah.
At least what I, see, what I observe.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to the fact that the world of work has changed so dramatically, how can educators and guidance specialists, begin to sort of close that gap between what students are learning at school and what will be expected of them when they enter the workforce?
I would love to start. This is where I would love to throw down my soapbox in, high school, college, and career. I think greater collaboration, and I actually see it. And I promote it within the communities that I navigate in. Other people do as well. High school, college, and career is a continuum, and so it's a contiguous. And when you have people like myself and some others who are college counselors, and you have our university counterparts, and just like they lean into industry to help out, I think that kind of collaboration, moreover, that kind of stakeholder capability to circle the wagons and sharpen pencils and start to look at, how to support the whole thing from soup to nuts. I know that I can lean into any one of my university counterparts and get this kind of information. Not so much about the curriculum as such, that could be part of the conversation, but moreover, how to take the information they know and bring value to the community I serve. We just had a careers day here at Dwight, and we had 17 universities here, and we had a panel discussion talking about how careers are changing. changing and how students can, restructure the internal dialogue to start considering how careers can potentially influence, study fields and so forth. And so, just to have that capture, that contiguousness, that collaboration amongst stakeholders on that same spectrum, in my humble opinion, I think that's a real house fire.
Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree with the collaboration piece, for sure. I think there's other kind of components that I think educators could include more, in the curriculum. I think progressive schools already include elements like entrepreneurship and maker spaces and hackathons and problem-based learning, and kind of more of a model where the teacher doesn't have the answers and they're actually more like working collectively, like towards like potential solutions, rather than there being like that direct instruction model of the teacher knows everything and then they're telling the student everything and then they're taking notes and then they're sitting for an exam, a couple of weeks later, which is pretty antiquated. But that said, I don't think that there needs to be like a huge revolution. So maybe I'm more of an incrementalist, but I guess I feel that the classic subjects, and when done well, I think courses and subjects that teach students how to read, how to write, how to speak, how to find evidence, how to formulate a hypothesis, and how to calculate and how to draw conclusions, and how like to do really what I think we would all agree that like these are the ultimate outcomes. Like these are those like transdisciplinary goals, these big picture things that we want students to walk away with. I think you can get that from a very traditional school model, as long as it is done, I think, well. And so I don't think we have to like blow up the whole concept of school, or else we actually potentially wind up, I think, sort of chasing some trendy, but maybe misguided, kind of approach, to education. But I do think that the pedagogy of like, well, how is that implemented, and what, how in the classroom, it's not like we need to throw away English classes and history classes and just do STEM and, technology, and everyone should just do coding and that's it. It's like, well, no. But that said, is like, what actually is happening in that classroom? And is it this more interactive and open-ended and maybe even like independently directed, kind of learning, and our schools and teachers creating, those opportunities for those students to mimic what life will later be like, where they don't have the answer and they're given a task by a supervisor to say, we need to create something here. A client wants such and such, and we're not sure what's going to work best. Can you, let's prototype a couple of things over the next 2 months. And if they haven't had that experience and they've just been lectured to and then examined, it's like, well, then that's going to be a really intimidating, kind of a work environment. But if they've kind of been in that environment where teachers have put them in that position before, and, and kind of tasked them with that original approach and coming up with multiple solutions, then they're going to feel a little bit more prepared for the unknown environments, that will come later.
Yeah, just to pick up on that point, I think that we talk about what kind of world we're preparing the kids for, what we're preparing our students for, and there's this concept of VUCA, the volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity that we find ourselves in a whole bunch of different ways. But that final point, that ambiguity, I think with remote working, there is an enormous amount of ambiguity that perhaps wasn't there in the past. And to your point, Jason, I think that working with students to help them work independently and build those analytical, critical thinking skills in order to be able to basically take a project and run with it. I think these are key skills that perhaps we didn't used to teach 10, 20, 30 years ago. And, I keep coming back to this idea that really we're not really preparing them for a particular job. We're not preparing students for a particular role anymore. I think it's our role to give them a whole bunch of skills in order to be able to work in the environments that they find themselves in. And to give you an example of that, I mean, at Immerse, we are putting together a new program. which focus specifically on this. We're looking at the future of work and the future of study, and how will these things play into it? Like, how will AI affect the law profession, for example? Will there be judgments in a court of law that are done through artificial intelligence? Similarly, with medicine, how will robotics affect medicine? Will there be simple routine surgery that's done by robots? All those kinds of things. Engineering, how can engineering ever be completely sustainable? So it's about understanding the themes as much as the academic content and the kind of context that our learners will find themselves in.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on that before we move on to focusing on more sort of region specific? Yes, is it?
Not region specific, but I'm thinking, because for the last few years, our efforts are combining, merging the SDG goals, for example, into the curriculum, merging the EDIJ, into the curriculum. I think, what educators and guidance specialists, can do is, really, while designing the curriculum, while designing everything, related to the education of students or learning of the students, considering these changes in the world that impacts also the future of the, work. What I mean is, for example, climate change, or this ongoing the digitalization or everything, but when students are in the classroom learning whatever, science, social studies, math, making them work on the real world problems so that it gives them more purpose, it gives them more reasoning, and it motivates them about what they learn. And the more I think we merge the curriculum with these kind of like real world issues, I think the students will be also more encouraged, and it will also help them, I think, learn about their interest, their passion, find out, because I think if they can also, if we can also, make them expose themselves to different experiences, like go to the community and learn about their needs in terms of business or in terms of environment, with having that mindset and bringing it into the classroom while learning whatever, math, or social studies. I think they can also find out their own career ideas. They can reflect on themselves. That's what I think the educators or the guidance specialists can do.
Hey, can I kick that can just a little further, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
On a recent flight, I had an absolutely amazing opportunity to witness some of these things firsthand. One of the things that really has me excited that our universities are starting to do is really embrace this interdisciplinary approach to learning. And so I was in Iowa State, and I watched a session with within their business college, and the students were there learning negotiation skills. And funnily enough, I'm thinking, well, these are business kids. And no, some of them were engineering students. Some of them were language people or liberal art people. And I thought to myself, this is kind of cool. I was in a session last night with Rose from St. Thomas. And again, this discussion point came up to see how, purely engineering degrees are possible, but schools and universities are also applying interdisciplinary contact points for kids to further explore. And I think that's super, super important. At that same session, I witnessed negotiation tactics, and the university, Iowa State, was able to pull in Pell Windows, which is a huge company that's located nearby. And so having that kind of cross-pollination, again, on that same continuum, and then also being able to explore the richness of integrating different curricula and in business as well, to just moderate and to bring a finer point on that learning. Again, that was a real celebration for me. And I think it kind of is a culminating example of some of the things that we just talked about.
Yeah, and if there's that opportunity in school as well for students to participate in that interdisciplinary nature. I think schools should try to capitalize on that. And I think that doesn't mean that every class, like we don't have to, it can be hard to, I think, envision like entire semester or year-long classes that sort of mix and match. But even if there's just kind of the the decree of like there needs to be a unit or a certain project where, all right, in the science class you're going to incorporate a humanities element, or in the humanities class you're going to incorporate a quantitative mathematical element, and kind of challenging teachers to think in that interdisciplinary way when perhaps they've been trained in a very kind of disciplinary sort of way, and getting departments talking to each other, and even something as simple as like I can think of like kind of the two schools that I've worked for overseas, that sometimes even just having those common spaces where like at one school, like we all ate lunch together. It was a small school. And so like all the faculty just kind of had a couple of tables and all the students were in the tables behind. But man, the conversations that would come up, and when you get a science teacher sitting next to a music teacher, sitting next to a math teacher, and they're talking about what's going on in their class, and you identify connections and you get talking, and it just kind of potentially just generates like some of those ideas, so that students don't have to wait to university, to kind of get that more interdisciplinary, element, or the workforce, but rather they actually get some exposure to it, even in high school, where if not done well, you can easily fall into these different silos of subjects and exams that kind of are only associated with that particular subject.
That's cool, Jason.
And it shows it can be done quite easily, right? Just creating a common space where people can get together across disciplines, just facilitating that environment can just inspire lots of different thoughts and ideas, right? Across disciplines. Yeah.
And
brilliant.
On that point, I mean, one of the things that came out of COVID, with everybody being locked down and working independently, one of the things that was really difficult to foster was innovation. And because, a lot of the time, great ideas come when you're in a situation like you've just described, where you're just bouncing ideas off each other. I mean, I guess we call them water cooler moments. And one of the things that we saw through COVID was a lot of intelligent people putting together virtual platforms which would allow exactly this kind of group facilitation and group interaction. So I kind of see it being extended not just from physical locations, but also into the virtual space as well. I mean, there's a lot of platforms out there that allow you to have these not just breakout rooms. That's kind of feels very old fashioned now from where we are, but certainly there are these virtual spaces where you can collaborate and work on things together.
Absolutely. And now just sort of looking at sort of more region specific, given the different regions you're all based, Middle East, Southeast Asia, UK, how relevant are regional differences when it comes to, current best practices around guidance counselling in schools? Be great to hear a bit about region specific best practices. Who'd like to go first? Yeah, Izek, go for it.
I can go first. I mean, my experience here, I was in Turkey before, and here I'm now here for the last 6 years. I think it's very important to inform the parents here, because the parents are still very, they are very powerful they are influencing the decision of the students. The students are not taking. Of course, it changes from family to family. We have expat families, we have local families, we have regional people, the families from region. But I will say, when I look at the majority, the parents are very powerful, and the kids follow what their parents also think. They are not very independent while deciding on their career paths. That's why it's important to convince the parents about the changes of these future, jobs, and because they wanna. When I look at the jobs that our kids, consider, they are very mainstream, like engineering, medicine, like maybe the same jobs that existed 15 years ago as a list. So when we mention about the data science or the biotech or these kind of, they want to know more, even though they are in the fields, or so I think that's a difference here in terms of the region.
Jason, do you want to take that from?
Yeah, or in Asia, I would say like there's still there remains, I think, a fixation on organizational prestige. And so I think like maybe highly progressive approaches to education, like a micro credentialing or something, is going to have a harder time, I think, taking off, because it unless you're building skills like later on in your career to maybe kind of upskill. But if you're kind of using it as a primary, I guess, degree or means of trying to qualify like for certain career paths, that actually what we've found over the last 5 years, at least at my school, that university lists have become more homogenized, actually narrower, that our students have always been, I think, more focused on STEM and business than perhaps the global average. And we have to take that into consideration, and especially depending upon where someone wants to start their career, if they are going to be starting their career, say, back in this region versus perhaps where they might go to university, say in North America or Europe. I think we can't totally disregard like the cultural values of the place from which they come and to which they may return. So I think we always have to set aside our own individual cultural values and try to put ourselves in the shoes of the students, and as Ed mentions, I think the parents who have perhaps more influence than in other cultures. That said, I find that our parent populations they don't really care what's being taught in school as long as they get admitted to a prestigious university. So so the outcome kind of like overrules all else. So we could have drum circles and gong baths and sing Kumbaya, and if it gets them admitted into an Ivy League school, then they're going to be all about it. So I do think but there winds up being this trickle down effect of like, well, but what does a university want? And so then, as a school, we can talk about, I think, within this group, which is all secondary education and or kind of focused towards serving the secondary school population of what might work best for the individual. But then we are, to a certain degree, influenced, at least, and perhaps even more than just influenced, by where are those students going, and that pipeline, and what is that trickle down effect, and what does the university say they require or recommend, or what trends do we notice in terms of those students who are admitted to certain universities. And so if a university says, well, we prefer AP Calc, regardless of what somebody is majoring in, then we're going to keep advising our students to take AP Calc instead of AP Stats, even if from a data analysis standpoint, that student might actually be better off taking AP Stats or the equivalent in whatever curriculum, your schools use. But when universities of a particular, kind of maybe group or tier have an acceptance rate so low that they're using kind of not random, but like not directly connected to like their future field of study, but just using credentials and be like, well, they've got such and such. And when we only accept 15% of our applicant pool, we're looking for something to serve as a tiebreaker because everyone's amazing. So, all right, like, well, this student who has taken this thing that has nothing to do with their literature major, but they took calc. So it's like, yeah, all right, they're a more attractive candidate. But then that doesn't help us if we're trying to re-envision maybe what education looks like and how we're trying to steer our students to prepare for a future. Instead, we wind up advising our students to follow the conventional path because that's ultimately what they want, is this certain outcome. And so then, we feel that conflict. And I've even told students before, I'm like, well, depending upon what hat I'm wearing, I would advise you to take this class or that class. And so you as an individual student, you need to make your decision, but here are my two thoughts. But I do feel conflicted at times because of that trickle down effect.
I think in the UK, at least, you mentioned the traditional path there, and that was it is quite eye-opening because I think that we still have that traditional path in the UK. Obviously, we've got an extensive university network, and at Immerse we do a lot of work with students that want to go to those high-end universities such as Oxford or Cambridge. But I do think that over the next few years, and we're already seeing it, I think we're seeing the emergence of an alternate path. And to pick up on your point about credentials, I think that this probably will be led by universities, this provision of alternate qualifications, because it used to be, we talked a lot about where we've come from. You'd go to university, you'd do a degree, and then you'd move into a job for life. Now, the alternative was you drop out of university, and then that would be kind of the end of you. But of course, it's not like that anymore. There's so many different alternatives out there for learners to kind of reestablish themselves. So I do see that we're seeing an emergence of a secondary path in higher education here in the UK. And I think it will take the form of those credentialized shorter programs that are job specific or industry specific. And I think learners are going to own that journey in their own sort of learning wallet. I think that's how we're seeing education change here. But we're in the middle of a huge change here, and it's not helped by the fact that there's the fees to go to university here are so big. And then, of course, that means that a lot of students are looking to go overseas to study, where it's more affordable, it's more accessible. But then, of course, that's all complicated by Brexit. We're no longer in the European Union. So I feel that we are at a real crossroads here in the UK with our university provision, and it's going to be an interesting ride to see where it takes us.
Yeah, this is so cool to get other perspectives from other regions. It's so nice. I love the fact of this conversation because, you embrace it. Because we don't know, we have to use that as a strategy to inform. And so, when you look at college counseling, you look at informing communities, the best, should I take physics or should I take math? Well, tell me what you want. Give me a direction where you're going. And so we start with that. Here, I do. And again, I'm not asking you to reach into the future. I'm asking you to make the first rung on the ladder. And so I look at it as a directional opportunity than a destination. And so if someone tells me, hey, I'm interested in engineering, I'm interested in finance, I have a direction I can go, because to the point of this conversation, there's so many unknowns that we can just inform the conversation to keep the motion, the forward movement. Again, high school, college, and career. When that child transitions to college, well, her knowledge base and her community base and her access to information is going to blow up. And so I embrace that. And I think it's really important that young people see that as an opportunity, and parents as well. I can't deny what our colleagues have said here. Parents, expectation management. You really need to talk about it. I was in a conversation a few days ago where the parent was adamant that the child was going to be an engineer. And, fortunately, the aspirations and the academics were in somewhat of an alignment. So it wasn't too far to reach. But the conversation had to go back to, well, let's unpack engineering. Because that's a bucket. That's a huge bucket. Are you talking mechanical engineering? Talking, electronic? There's so many. And then, are you talking about purely, engineering? Or could you look at project management? Or could you look at management? And so, given the scope of our conversation today, I love the fact that I get to celebrate and find those loose threads and weave them into a greater narrative or a greater internal conversation for my students. I cannot, in fact, it was mentioned, I shouldn't be the one who's influencing directional focus. I should be the one who's informing it, providing information to our communities and our parents and our students so they can create those greater outcomes. And I think it is important. Parents are stakeholders. My own daughter just went to college this year. So, I luxuriated in the fact that I got to be part of her conversation, although I'm not sure she would agree. But I love that. I absolutely love that. And I think that as a counselor, we need to be a source of strength in our communities. We need to be people who bring information to help our communities get better outcomes.
Yeah, well said. And when it comes to anticipating what these different skills will need to be that we need to teach, how can educators? It's a bit of a trickier question to sort of predict, but how could educators, in your opinion, effectively anticipate and predict what skills they need to be teaching, and how can they perhaps implement this more within their teaching practices to help better prepare students? And any thoughts on that one?
I think as educators, we're always trying to look around the corner in the future. But there's a lot of evidence and research out there that talks about those skills gaps when students do go into the workplace. And we kind of touched a little bit on this, but there's a particular piece of research that is all around student versus employer perception. So I'm looking at the results on my other screen here. And, they basically quizzed a whole bunch of students who were entering the workplace in terms of how would they rate their own capabilities in mainly soft skills areas, things like leadership, things like teamwork, collaboration, etc. And then they asked the same set of questions to employers who are working with recent graduates. And it's there where you can begin to see, the big differences. So, for example, oral and written communication, 61% of the graduates thought that was a strong skill for them, but it was less than 40% for the employers. Similarly, with leadership, there was a huge difference between what the student perceives they're able to do and what the employer actually sees as their skills. So I think that there's a lot that we can do around that. And then on that side of things, there was a post yesterday that I read on LinkedIn, and it was talking about, the one skill that employers value more than anything else is nothing academic. It's nothing to do with what you've achieved so far, but it's that willingness to continue learning. It's that lifelong learning and the ability to continue to improve and continue to learn and be open to that kind of thing. So I think that I realize that I'm sort of talking from a particular perspective, perhaps, but I do feel that that's an area that we should be looking at in terms of what are the skills gaps, what are we hearing from our partners in the workplace, and how can we build programs that address those deficits.
Yeah, I would agree with the lifelong learning bit, that trying to foster, I think, a culture of that continual learning, that earning a certain degree is not a finish line, that this is just a step on the journey. And so whether that's high school or university or beyond, but in a dynamic, work environment, you're going to have to continue to upskill, and new technologies will emerge, and you might have to pivot to a totally different industry. And don't think that by choosing this class or this series of classes or this school or this major or whatnot, that you're setting your future. But I think Andy brings up a good point about kind of just all of the soft skill stuff. And I'd go back to kind of earlier, I mentioned that whenever you read all of those surveys about workplace desirable skills, it's always the things that are not discipline specific, that it is about communication and teamwork and collaboration and communication, interpersonal skills, problem solving, analysis, like all of these things that are kind of, we wind up teaching them, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with the Great Gatsby, or it doesn't have to do with trigonometry. But it's something bigger that we wind up doing. So as long as I think a school is well developed, and especially for schools with, I think, the more progressive curricula, like an IB, certainly qualifies as that, where you've got theory of knowledge and extended essays and a variety of courses that students get to choose, and there's opportunities outside of the classroom to develop these interests, then I think you're actually in a pretty good spot, a good starting spot anyway. Where maybe there's of greater concern is kind of those very traditional systems, the Gaokao in China, and the DSE in Hong Kong, and the Korean Sunyang, and these very rigid drill, memorize, regurgitate, sort of models of education, where really that's more problematic. But I'm assuming, I think, that the majority of the constituencies that we work with, and that I think most, people watching this, are probably in that international school where you have diverse student bodies, different perspectives, communication is emphasized, and at least there is that that curricular progressiveness for the opportunity. And I mentioned earlier that then I think it just comes down to pedagogy of like, well, then how are in the classroom, how are teachers creating those opportunities? Because curricularly, at least, it's in a pretty good starting spot, I think.
Yeah, David, is there any final thoughts before moving on to the next question?
Yeah, I love this. This is kind of fun. I love to get the perspectives, and I wholeheartedly agree with everything our colleagues are saying. And I think that whole lifelong learning, I always tell my students, man, education is a revolving door. You're going to be in and out of it for the rest of your life, especially if there's something that's got you excited. If there's something that's got you excited and you really, really want to do that, well, then let's go somewhere where you can get what you need to continue to aspire and to achieve. And so, and education is not limited to, a space or books or, a collegiate or, university setting. Andy, you mentioned earlier you spend a lot of time on YouTube. I tell my students, and my wife knows this, I probably spend more time on YouTube than my own kids do. But I love the fact that there's so much access to information out there. I am so optimistic about the future. I'm so optimistic in working with the kids that I work with, and I'm sure we can all agree that we got this. And I think that's an important thing. Some of the things we're talking about, if I'm honest with you, can be a real sticking point for kids and a real source of anxiety. And so just talking to kids and just bringing them back into, well, hey, let's focus on this. Let's come up with some specific strategies to address some of these things that you want to achieve. And more importantly, don't get caught up into trying to have that destination focus. Look at it as in a direction. Look at it as an evolution. Look at it as growth. And I laughingly tell kids, I'm 29 years old and I still haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. So, all these things are amazing, important touch points to the whole continuation and the process itself. I think I still remain optimistic about it.
Excellent. And yeah, is that do you want to, did you?
Yeah. I mean, while I was thinking of this question I kept thinking about partnerships, partnerships between the schools, the colleges, and then the industry. I think it's how the educators can be really up to date in terms of, because to be honest, all the educators, they follow, they read, they watch these all kinds of talks that are given by the futurists or those people from the industry. But I think there should be more concrete structures between the higher education institutions and the industry, so that the educators can also be up to date while preparing their learners in terms of like the designing the curriculum or the assessments, so that they can change if certain, for example, assessment methods are not necessarily working or not necessarily needed later, then the schools have to change it. There is no point of I think pushing things that are not needed in the second or in the third steps. So, and I think we should also inform our learners about like the changes in the industry. Instead of they're going to do college right after high school, maybe they should have some work experience, that they should hear from the industry side, and then make their choices. Or they should choose options where they can have experience, direct exposure to the field that they want to work in, and continue their education also. So I think we should think of these alternatives. But to make our learners and to make our educators think about this, I think they should also have a connection with these people. So like one thing, for example, we are thinking is having an advisory board that's composed of university admission officers from different parts of the world, so that we can hear from them and we can pass those suggestions, those recommendations to our leadership and to our faculty. So we want to create that kind of a structure. And I think it would be a good idea to also have that kind of advisory board by the people who are working in the industry. I mean, our school board is composed of people from different professions, but having more a structure which can also consult, the school leadership.
It's an interesting point. Just sort of touching on that quickly. David and Jason, the schools that you work at, how closely do your schools work with companies, industry as well? Just out of interest, just to, I suppose, quick points on that.
Yeah, well, I like is that where our board is comprised of mostly folks here in Hong Kong working in different industries, but Hong Kong is also perhaps also a little homogenous in terms of industry, in that I would say 3/4 of our parents and board members work in finance, because it's a financial capital of the world, so that can provide maybe just a certain myopic view. We do have like an alumni internship program, with a couple of dozen of our alums who live in Hong Kong who are willing to take on students as interns of various lengths, from lengths of a couple of weeks to a couple of months. We had also an alumni like careers program where we'd bring in alums to talk about their different careers. But again, it was very overly represented in finance and business, at large. So there, I wouldn't say there are deep ties, but there are at least kind of some of these connection points where we try to get some of that exposure. But then COVID also, frankly, kind of over the last couple of years dried up some of the momentum that we were building, I think, towards that, where now suddenly nobody wants anybody in the workplace if they don't belong there, and just everything kind of like shutting down and people working remotely. And so now, like, okay, well, Hong Kong has also been later in the reopening. Like, it's only the last 3 or 4 or 5 months where Hong Kong has actually opened up again. And so hopefully some of that winds up coming back. But even in its best circumstance, I would say we're a highly academic institution that just has some of these kind of industry ties to expose students.
Yeah, I would go right on the back here, Jason. And we have many of the same components. I think that schools are communities, and so I love to continue to work within the community I'm constantly helped to build. And so reaching out to parents is, and Jason, I think any of us who are counseling can probably relate to and feel the same pain of trying to do a careers day. It's a real kind of moment. But when you've done a few and you've done 3 or 4, and it's within the community and it's an established thing that people come to expect every time of the year, people step up. I had the former regional president of Honeywell in here, and he was such an amazing speaker to talk about, how one of the Apollo astronauts was heard kicking on the recording when the lunar module was landing. And he made a joke saying that was the Honeywell computer, by the way, because the components went offline, and your mobile phone right now has more. And he talked about how he was the president of the slide rule group in his school. And of course, students were like, slide rule? I thought it was funny as sin, because I clearly knew what he was talking about. He put a picture of a slide rule up there. And again, kids were like, what is that? And so setting the humor aside, having people like Norman to come in and talk to our kids and there's such an energy that's created, and then to find people. We had doctors, we had people come in from finance, of course, that work within the community. And Dubai has no shortage of entrepreneurs here, I should say. And it's neat to kind of, even me, I need to hear what they're saying, because it helps me with my sessions with kids. And I can refer to, did you hear what Mr. Collins was talking about when he was talking about, forensics in accounting, forensic finance? I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I kind of heard about it, but to hear him talk about it, and forgive me for all the anecdotal bits here, but I hope that it underscores the absolute importance it is to, is at its point, that that continual stakeholder collaboration amongst the high school college career thing, because again, not unlike what I said earlier with how universities are reaching into their communities to bring in, experts in the fields of whatever to help inform their decision making processes. That's a thing. And then I would, that constant trickle down to where we can continue to reach into to get that same kind of content and information, to have that supported by industry people for schools, with parents working in the communities to come in and continue that conversation. It really just helps to open up a whole universe of possibilities in the young mind, and I celebrate that.
Just to jump in here, I think I love this conversation, because one of the things that we are doing with our new programs is we've put together a steering group. So our academic team will put together the curriculum, and I know we're going to talk about curriculum in a moment, Max, but I just want to make this quick point. But we are then sharing that with industry experts, and we're getting their input on it. We're getting their feedback on it. Before we commit anything to paper, we want to get their take on it as well. Is this relevant for where you see the industry going? And I think that's the kind of collaboration that we could all be doing much, much more of. Engage at a very early stage of course planning, what the outcomes are going to be and how they fit into the industry that we're preparing our students for.
That's epic.
Awesome. Thanks, Andy. And yeah, just moving on to that, just touching on the points of the curriculum, digging into a little bit before we move on to our last question. What areas of the current curriculum that you each teach do you think need to make the biggest changes, perhaps in bridging those skills gaps? Is there one particular area of the curriculum or a couple of areas that you'd like to sort of mention there? Do you want to say that one?
Sorry. I was trying to. I took some notes, and for the curriculum, I think the biggest changes to help these bridge the skill gaps is, again, making it more like merging it with the needs, merging it with the trends. Like definitely climate change, is going to create new jobs, right? That's why I think they call it green is the new digital. For example, that's why I think incorporating the SDGs into the curriculum, is important, in my opinion, or bringing the community problems into the classroom, or taking the students outside the classroom so that they have, they're exposed, as part of their curriculum, to these problems, and they can understand what kind of skill sets they need, to learn, so that, they can chase, or they can try to find out those learning or, opportunities within our school structure or outside the school structure. Because right now we have a lot of resources at school, but we are also, encouraging our students to go beyond that. If they're interested in astronomy, if they're interested in space travel, like we direct them to different resources, because I think they have that option. I think this is how we can by merging these big problems, or big changes, big trends that are going towards the future into our curriculum, so that we will be preparing our learners, for their career paths, and we will be, not only the skill sets, but it's also the mindset, preparing them. That's why there is a huge emphasis on, for example, global citizenship, in our school, for example, and I hear it from my colleagues, and I'm also taking one certification program, which is the global citizenship, so I think that's how we can fill those gaps.
David, Jason, Andy, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'd agree with what Izzat just said. The only thing I would add to that is, as well as curriculum, I think we need to think as much about curriculum as we do about delivery. So what modality are we delivering our education in? And I appreciate that different contexts perhaps close some of the doors in that sense, but I think what we're doing at Immerse is everything is blended. So we're moving away from just tutor instruction. We're creating self-study modules. So we're kind of encouraging that independent thinking and that sort of self-study, autonomous learning. Because I think that by structuring a program like that, you're actually mirroring what will happen later in life in the workplace. We've talked a lot about remote working, and I don't think that's something that is going away. I think it's going to increase. So we're looking increasingly at hybrid digital models for our programs and how they can then accurately reflect what's around the corner, what's coming once you enter the workplace. And, aside from all that, I think at its heart, any program has to have, great teaching. That's always what's going to set it apart, irrespective of how it's delivered, because, nobody ever remembers a good computer, but they'll remember a good teacher.
Well said. David, Jason, any final thoughts on areas of the curriculum that need to make the biggest changes?
Yeah, just a few quick hits. I'd say that I think, like, say, for instance, like English, I think it's sometimes, depending upon the school or the class, be a little too focused on, say, grammar or vocabulary or things that frankly are kind of now, I think we all outsource to Grammarly or like some other, sort of software program. So while it's it's important to have an understanding, I think, of those fundamentals, I do think that an English class ought to be, especially at the high school level, more geared towards the rhetoric and the credible sources and the gathering evidence and the argumentation and kind of like that higher level stuff. I think math can sometimes be a little stuck in just solving different kinds of problems, but totally out of context. So I think of my own math education and where, like, when it came to calculus, like I could do whatever problem the teacher was telling me, but I had no idea what I was doing or why I was doing it. So I think trying to insert as much of like a real world context of like, how might this be used for this type of, kind of problem, rather than just moving from one problem set, to another. And then I think rather than kind of, making the changes, I think even just emphasizing the things that I think are already going well, a theory of knowledge and extended essay and AP capstone and National History Day was one that at one school of mine, our students got so excited about this kind of, and I think it was Andy who mentioned something like that. Like when you have an audience, that you're actually presenting stuff to. I'm not turning in a paper to a teacher, like an audience of one who's just going to give me a grade, but I'm actually like presenting something to people who are going to walk around or people who are going to listen to a presentation. Like as a student, you see them all like up their game, like there's more at stake here than just a grade. Science labs usually are a great kind of application, of learning. And I think we see it all the time, like other applied learning with, music concerts. Like we don't just have students learn pieces and play it for the music teacher, but we have them, collaborate as an ensemble, as an orchestra, and then they're performing for everybody. And like there's that extra pressure to like learn their parts. Cause like, hey, we're actually trying to put something together, or we're doing the play or the musical, or the art students have a gallery and people are going to see this. And, again, those hackathons or the maker spaces where people are collaborating, then maybe there's competitions and, our team is trying to develop this. But any of that, I think there are enough of those, I think, already there, or I would say we have these prototypes, but how can we just kind of, all right, how can we double that? How can we triple that? How can we get that into certain classes where maybe that doesn't fit as well as it does for robotics and the hackathons and the coding and some of the more technologically driven, sort of subjects. And just trying to find more spaces to implement those.
I want to give one example, Max, to also exemplify what I say. For example, I see that like in the last few years, the English teachers are asking more the counselors about the mental health, content of their books that they choose, for example, which is, I think, one of the skills that, like I'm talking about resiliency or mental health awareness is definitely something I think that will be more and more important in the future in the workplaces also. And another important, I think, changes is my colleague is the EDIJ, like inclusion, equity, diversity, inclusion and justice coordinator. And for example, he works with the English teachers while they are choosing the content, like the books or the text they read, which is, I think, also important because the cross-cultural competence is one of the skill sets, for example, that's needed. I think that's getting more and more important in the workplaces, in the companies. So I think when I mentioned about merging things, these are the, I think, examples in English, social studies, and there are other examples of it, but of course the time is limited. I just wanted to mention it, quickly.
That's an excellent point. Yeah, for sure. David, any final thoughts on that with regards to the curriculum before we move on to the last question?
I'm going to help you with this. Actually, I'm going to kind of tip my hat to the question as well. And I just want to start off by saying, Jason, I'm so impressed that you made it all the way to calculus, brother. I don't think I got past algebra without a huge mental strain. Yeah, I think if in leading into the last part, if I had my magic wand and I could somehow conjure up the change, it would be to incorporate career and guidance counseling and college counseling into a regular curriculum. Just a show of hands, are any of you, do your schools actually incorporate that into the daily curriculum? Jason, is that Andy? Do you guys incorporate college and career counseling into the regular curriculum? Show of hands.
We're slightly different, but yeah, we do a little bit of that. Yeah.
Not
Jason?
into content classes, but our counseling program has a seminar curriculum at each grade level, grade 9 through 12. So we have like a 1 quarter to 1 semester class, depending upon the grade level, that kind of touches on various social emotional learning or university advising, or in grade 10 is where we tend to emphasize a little bit more of the career exposure bits.
That's important too. Is that?
We do have 6 weeks modules for each grade level where we, talk about different things, like in grade 10 more the career emphasis, career counseling, and then grade 11 college, and obviously in grade 12. So, but I don't think that it's enough, the 6 weeks, because where I came from, Robert College Istanbul, where, we had 1 hour embedded to the weekly schedule so that you can go really, deep in different levels, like the career counseling, college counseling. So
Cool.
I can see the difference,
Yeah, I think it's again, that's my magic wand moment. That would be my final thoughts on that. Would be my big change if I can make it. And I think that areas of the curriculum, to go back to the question we're currently, is I would love to see the work that we do being incorporated into a larger curricular structure. I'm pretty lucky in that I'm moving in that direction. SLT here, senior leadership here at Dwight, are fantastic, and they're very supportive of that because it helps on so many different levels. And so, I think if I could make that curriculum change, along with the interdisciplinary thing that keeps popping up, I think that is super terrific. Learning with a purpose, right? That would be the biggest changes that I
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And we're running a little bit over time, but yeah, just sort of touching on the last question. And I know we've talked a lot about these different areas that need to be changed and developed, and already things that are being done really well, and amplifying those in schools. Is there one particular change that you think every school should make in anticipation of preparing students for the future world of work going forwards? Is there sort of one thing that's front of mind? Who'd like to take that one?
I mean, for me, sorry, is it you go, please?
No, please, you're first.
I was just going to repeat the point I made earlier. I just think engage with industry leaders, engage with industry experts, think about how that can influence your curriculum, think about how that can influence the outcomes that our students will have. That's it from me, really.
Fantastic. Is that, yeah.
I think I totally agree, and I would say the same thing with Andy. We shouldn't isolate ourselves from the world that we are living in. And that's, for example, what I see as a big difference between where I work, where I live, and with where Andy is now. I think between the students, like learners that we work with, I sometimes feel that Middle East, I don't know how you feel, David, but it's not very, it's quite artificial sometimes. And it also, I think, causes the learners, students, not necessarily feel the, the realities, understand the realities of the industry or the real world problems. But what I would say is I like co-op practices, of some universities, for example, in different countries. I think high schools can do something like that, where, as part of the curriculum, making it compulsory for students to have an experience, the experience in the industry, which I think will be important to talk about their career, and it will give them the exposure for us as counselors to work with later. So that's my opinion.
Fantastic. David, Jason, any final thoughts on that, the one change?
For me, I guess rather than making a change, I think I'd advocate for not making a certain change, which is I think there's a temptation to move in that a much greater STEM direction and mandate coding and kind of perhaps strip away some of those humanities because they are more broad-based and maybe a little less professional and oriented towards career opportunities. But I think that would be a mistake because for a couple of reasons. One, I think the humanities actually provide a lot of those critical thinking, the communication, all of those things that employers actually want. And actually, as a fellow history major, I think, Andy, you were a history major too. I also feel like it has provided us with a certain adaptability of no, I'm not a historian, but at the same time, I think we picked up a number of, vital skills along the way that when you are facing an unpredictable, ambiguous, all the VUCA, I forgot all of the acronym, but when you are facing that future, if you get an accounting degree or you get a certain professional degree, you do run the risk of having a very narrow focus. And yes, you're more likely to be employed at 23, I suppose. But then what happens when TurboTax partners with an AI software program and accountants are no longer needed, or when the law profession shrinks by 50% because your very basic contract write-ups, are done, automated. And so being able to kind of, go with the times and having more of those general skills, I think, is important. But then also, even just from the sake of, if you're just focused on STEM, then you also run the risk of, I think, becoming an overly technocratic society where you're just, inventing for the sake of inventing and not necessarily thinking about why are we doing things and should we do things and what are the ethics behind that and what are the rules that we should set up around it, and then there's potentially some danger there, and less thought and less culture, and so I guess I would encourage don't overcorrect because again, I think this foundation is still pretty solid for that future, and it's probably more just little tweaks here and there rather than a true revolution that's needed.
David, any final thoughts there?
Yeah, kind of, as I mentioned earlier, I probably led in with what I thought was an important contribution to curriculum. Again, having a college and career component to a curriculum, and I think that with that kind of outreach, creating authentic outreach with universities, which I absolutely love to do. And by doing so, I'm able to bring colleagues in. When Jeff Jones is in the region, I'll say, hey, want me to come in and talk to your teachers about, setting up an art portfolio, or let me talk to them about some of the new digital structures that are growing. Absolutely. And I can go on and name, a number of colleagues who can not only inform my community about, best fit and preparedness, but also talk to my colleagues and community and senior leaders. And to the point I keep coming back to, that continuum, our university counterparts can really lean into, if they could put the marketing sticks away and grasp a greater outreach potential. I think that's my favorite word is a house fire. And so that would be my magic wand, is to incorporate greater structures for career future preparedness and counseling along those lines. to the extent that we can service and provide greater value, not only to our community, but to our staff, our students, and pretty much everybody we serve.
Fantastic. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating conversation. And maybe in 5 to 10 years, this conversation will be entirely different, but you never know. It's fascinating to think about where things are headed, what the current situation is with the schools, and the great, fantastic pieces of guidance that you're putting in place, and bridging those gaps between secondary school, higher education, the world of work. That can only be a good thing, right? So thank you so much for your time, and really looking forward to maybe doing a part 2.